For years, they were one of British television's most recognizable couples. Whether they were chatting with celebrity guests, laughing over light-hearted moments, or presenting live television together, Eamonn Holmes and Ruth Langsford seemed to represent stability in an industry where relationships often struggled to survive. Their chemistry looked effortless, their humor felt genuine, and millions of viewers believed they had found the perfect balance between work and family life. That image remained intact for decades, until everything changed. When news of their separation became public in 2024, fans were stunned. After more than 27 years together and 14 years of marriage, the couple confirmed they were ending their relationship. At first, very little was said. Their official statement was respectful, brief, and carefully worded. It asked for privacy while they navigated a deeply personal chapter of their lives. But as weeks turned into months, speculation only intensified. Headlines appeared almost daily, anonymous sources offered conflicting explanations, and social media quickly filled the silence with theories. For a long time, Eamonn Holmes chose not to respond. While countless stories circulated about what had happened behind closed doors, he rarely addressed them directly. Instead, he focused on his health, his broadcasting career, and rebuilding his daily life after years of physical challenges. That silence led many people to wonder whether he would ever share his perspective. Now, however, Holmes has spoken more openly about the difficult period surrounding the end of his marriage. Rather than launching personal attacks or making sensational accusations, his comments have reflected on regret, priorities, and the emotional cost of trying to balance an intense career with family life. His words have added another layer to a story that many believed had already been fully told. To understand why his recent remarks have attracted so much attention, it's important to look back at the remarkable career that made him one of Britain's most familiar television personalities. Born in Belfast, Northern Ireland, Eamonn Holmes entered broadcasting at a young age. Unlike many television personalities who achieved fame overnight, his rise was built steadily through years of experience in local journalism and live presenting. Early in his career, he worked in regional television, learning every aspect of broadcasting before eventually becoming one of the country's most respected live presenters. His reputation grew because of his calm delivery, quick wit, and ability to handle unpredictable live television. Producers trusted him during breaking news, major sporting events, and high-profile interviews because he remained composed even when broadcasts didn't go according to plan. That consistency became his trademark. The biggest turning point came when Holmes became one of the original presenters of GMTV in the early 1990s. Morning television demands a unique combination of professionalism and warmth. Viewers are beginning their day, often before sunrise, and presenters become part of their daily routine. Holmes excelled in that environment, spending years helping shape British breakfast television. Over the following decades, his career expanded across numerous major broadcasters. He presented news programs, entertainment shows, sports coverage, documentaries, and special events. His versatility allowed him to move comfortably between serious interviews and light-hearted conversations, something relatively few presenters managed with equal success. Eventually, audiences would come to associate him just as much with one person as with the programs themselves, Ruth Langsford. Their relationship began long before they became an on-screen partnership. Introduced through mutual friends in the late 1990s, they developed a relationship away from television cameras. Holmes had already experienced one marriage and was determined to keep his private life out of the headlines until the relationship had become firmly established. That decision reflected something both would later speak about publicly. Neither wanted their romance to become media entertainment. They preferred to build their relationship privately before inviting public attention. Over time, however, their personal and professional lives naturally merged. As both became established television presenters, producers recognized the genuine chemistry they shared. Unlike partnerships created purely for television, Holmes and Langsford already understood each other's personalities, sense of humor, and communication style. When they eventually began presenting together, audiences immediately noticed the difference. Their conversations felt authentic rather than rehearsed. They teased each other naturally, occasionally disagreed, and often laughed at unexpected moments that couldn't have been scripted. That authenticity helped make them one of Britain's favorite television couples. Their partnership became especially familiar on This Morning, where Friday broadcasts featuring the pair attracted loyal audiences. Viewers enjoyed watching a married couple who seemed comfortable enough to disagree without creating unnecessary drama. It felt relatable. Outside television, their family life also appeared settled. They married in 2010 after many years together and shared a son, Jack, while Holmes also maintained relationships with his children from his first marriage. From the outside, everything suggested a family built on patience, experience, and mutual respect. But no relationship exists entirely without pressure. As their television careers continued, both faced major professional changes. Broadcasting itself was evolving. New presenters entered the industry, programming strategies shifted, and established stars increasingly found themselves adapting to changing audiences. Those changes inevitably created new challenges. At the same time, Holmes began experiencing increasingly serious health problems. Initially, viewers noticed only small differences. Occasionally, he appeared uncomfortable while standing. Later, he began using a walking stick. Eventually, he spoke openly about suffering from chronic back pain and mobility problems that significantly affected his everyday life. Doctors later diagnosed multiple spinal issues that required extensive treatment. Surgeries, rehabilitation, physiotherapy, and long recovery periods became part of his routine. What viewers saw on television represented only a fraction of what he experienced away from the cameras. Holmes has repeatedly described how difficult losing independence became. Simple daily activities that most people never think twice about suddenly required assistance. For someone whose career had always depended on confidence, energy, and movement, the adjustment proved emotionally exhausting. Throughout much of that period, Ruth Langsford publicly supported her husband. During interviews, she often expressed hope that his condition would improve, while acknowledging how challenging long-term recovery could be. Friends and colleagues frequently commented on how devoted she appeared during his difficult rehabilitation. Yet prolonged illness doesn't only affect one person. It changes routines, responsibilities, emotional dynamics, and sometimes entire relationships. Many couples discover that caring for a partner through years of physical difficulties introduces pressures few could have anticipated. Neither Holmes nor Langsford publicly suggested that health problems alone caused their marriage to end. But Holmes has since acknowledged that balancing work, recovery, and family became increasingly difficult as the years passed. Then came the announcement that surprised almost everyone. In May 2024, the couple confirmed they had separated and were beginning divorce proceedings. The statement remained respectful and avoided assigning blame. It emphasized privacy and asked the public to respect their family's wishes. For many fans, it marked the end of what had seemed like one of British television's strongest partnerships. But while the public searched for dramatic explanations, Holmes remained largely silent. That silence would eventually make his later comments carry even greater weight. The months following the separation announcement became some of the most closely watched of Eamonn Holmes' career. Every public appearance was analyzed, every interview dissected, and every social media post interpreted as a hidden message. Yet despite the intense public interest, Holmes largely resisted the temptation to respond to every rumor. Instead, he allowed others to speculate while focusing on rebuilding his own life. That silence was unusual. Throughout his broadcasting career, Holmes had built a reputation for speaking his mind. Whether discussing current events, television, or the broadcasting industry itself, he rarely avoided expressing an honest opinion. But when it came to the breakdown of his marriage, he drew a clear line. Friends and colleagues noted that he appeared determined to keep deeply personal matters away from public debate. Meanwhile, Ruth Langsford also handled the situation with remarkable restraint. During interviews promoting her television work, she acknowledged that divorce is painful regardless of who you are. She explained that ending such a long relationship wasn't something anyone simply gets over overnight. Instead, she focused on moving forward, continuing her career, and spending time with family and close friends. Neither side launched public attacks against the other. That alone distinguished their separation from many high-profile celebrity breakups. However, public curiosity never disappeared. Media outlets continued reporting on alleged disagreements, anonymous insider claims, and supposed reasons behind the split. Some reports emphasized Holmes' demanding work schedule. Others suggested years of health struggles had placed enormous emotional pressure on the relationship. Additional stories focused on lifestyle changes after Holmes left ITV and joined GB News, where his professional routine became very different from Ruth's. Much of that reporting relied heavily on unnamed sources, making it difficult for anyone outside the family to know exactly what had happened behind closed doors. Eventually, Holmes began addressing the broader subject, not by revealing private arguments, but by reflecting on the lessons he had learned. In several interviews, he admitted that one of his biggest regrets involved the balance between career and personal life. Looking back over decades in television, Holmes acknowledged that broadcasting often demanded extremely long hours, constant travel, unpredictable schedules, and an almost continuous public presence. Morning television, in particular, requires presenters to wake long before dawn, leaving little room for a conventional family routine. For years, he accepted those sacrifices as simply part of the profession. Only later, with the benefit of hindsight, did he begin questioning whether enough attention had been given to life outside the studio. Rather than blaming anyone else, Holmes spoke about the importance of priorities. Success in broadcasting had brought extraordinary opportunities, but it had also required compromises. Like many people approaching retirement age, he found himself looking back and wondering whether certain choices might have been different if he had understood their long-term impact. Those comments resonated with many viewers because they extended beyond celebrity gossip. Millions of people understand what it feels like to spend years pursuing professional success, while unintentionally allowing relationships to become secondary. Holmes wasn't presenting himself as a victim or attempting to rewrite history. Instead, he appeared to be acknowledging a reality many families experience. Work can gradually consume more time than anyone originally intended. His health struggles only intensified those pressures. By the early 2020s, Holmes' mobility had deteriorated significantly. Multiple spinal problems caused constant pain, affecting nearly every aspect of daily life. Even after undergoing surgery, recovery proved far slower than expected. Instead of returning quickly to normal life, he found himself facing months of rehabilitation. Then came another devastating setback. Only weeks after one operation, Holmes suffered a serious fall at home, tumbling down a staircase and sustaining additional injuries. The accident delayed recovery even further and forced doctors to adjust his rehabilitation plans. For someone accustomed to spending decades in front of television cameras, projecting confidence and control, suddenly needing help with basic daily activities proved emotionally difficult. Holmes later admitted that losing independence affected him almost as much as the physical pain itself. He described relying on walking aids, physiotherapy, and constant medical appointments while trying to remain optimistic in public. Broadcasting had always been a fast-moving profession, but his body no longer allowed him to move at the same pace. During this period, viewers noticed something else. Holmes became increasingly open about vulnerability. Earlier in his career, interviews often centered on television, ratings, celebrity guests, or current affairs. More recently, however, he began discussing aging, resilience, physical limitations, and the importance of appreciating good health before it disappears. Those conversations revealed a different side of the veteran presenter. Rather than projecting the image of someone determined to hide every struggle, Holmes acknowledged fear, frustration, disappointment, and uncertainty. That honesty earned sympathy from many longtime viewers who had watched him on television for decades. As public attention gradually shifted away from rumors surrounding the divorce, Holmes' reflections became less about assigning responsibility and more about accepting reality. He openly admitted that some chapters of life simply cannot be rewritten. Relationships change. Families evolve. Health declines. Careers eventually slow. The challenge, he suggested, is learning how to move forward without allowing regret to define the future. That perspective also explained why he refused to engage in public arguments. Despite sensational headlines suggesting explosive revelations, Holmes' own comments remained noticeably measured. Rather than criticizing Ruth directly, he consistently emphasized reflection over accusation. Even when discussing painful memories, he rarely spoke with bitterness. Instead, he acknowledged that every long relationship contains moments outsiders never see. Successes, disappointments, sacrifices, misunderstandings, and private conversations all remain known only to the people involved. For viewers hoping for dramatic confrontations, his approach may have seemed surprisingly restrained. But for those listening carefully, the message was arguably more powerful. Sometimes the hardest thing to admit isn't that someone else made mistakes. It's recognizing the decisions you wish you had handled differently yourself. And according to Holmes, that realization becomes much clearer once enough time has passed to look back honestly. As time passed, the public conversation surrounding Eamonn Holmes and Ruth Langsford slowly shifted. The initial shock of the separation gave way to something more reflective. Rather than asking what had happened, many people began asking how two people who had shared nearly 3 decades together could eventually find themselves living completely different lives. For Holmes, the answer never appeared to be simple. He has repeatedly suggested that relationships rarely end because of one single event. Instead, they are often shaped by years of changing circumstances, unexpected challenges, and countless small moments that gradually alter the direction of two people's lives. Looking back over his own journey, Holmes has acknowledged that the final years of the marriage were unlike anything either of them could have anticipated. His health had become an unavoidable part of everyday life. Medical appointments replaced social plans. Physiotherapy became a daily routine. Even simple outings required careful planning. The broadcaster who had once spent hours effortlessly moving around television studios now found himself calculating every step, every staircase, and every journey. That reality inevitably affected his outlook. During interviews, Holmes admitted that chronic pain changes more than just the body. It influences confidence, patience, energy levels, and even personality. Living with constant discomfort makes ordinary situations more difficult, and maintaining optimism becomes a challenge in itself. He has spoken candidly about waking up each morning hoping to feel stronger, only to discover that recovery was progressing much more slowly than expected. Despite those setbacks, Holmes refused to completely step away from broadcasting. Continuing to work became an important source of purpose. Appearing on television reminded him that he was still capable of contributing professionally, even while dealing with physical limitations away from the cameras. That determination earned admiration from colleagues who understood how demanding live broadcasting can be. At the same time, Ruth Langsford was entering a very different stage of life. While Holmes concentrated on rehabilitation, Langsford continued developing her own television career. She remained a familiar face on daytime television and gradually began speaking about embracing independence after the end of her marriage. Her interviews reflected acceptance rather than resentment. She acknowledged that divorce is never something anyone hopes for, especially after such a long relationship. But she also emphasized the importance of moving forward instead of remaining trapped in the past. That message resonated with many viewers who had experienced similar life changes. Rather than portraying herself as defeated, Langsford explained that rebuilding confidence takes time. Eventually, however, she discovered that being on her own did not have to be something she feared. Those comments demonstrated that both individuals were attempting to navigate the same life event in different ways. Holmes focused on reflection. Langsford focused on rebuilding. Neither approach was necessarily right or wrong. They simply reflected two different personal journeys. Naturally, the media continued searching for dramatic headlines. Stories regularly appeared suggesting secret disagreements, hidden confrontations, or shocking revelations that would supposedly explain everything. Yet Holmes himself consistently avoided encouraging that narrative. When asked about regret, his responses remained surprisingly thoughtful. He acknowledged that success often comes at a price. Throughout decades in broadcasting, work frequently came first because it had to. Television schedules rarely accommodate birthdays, anniversaries, holidays, or family routines. Live broadcasting demands complete commitment, and presenters quickly learn that audiences expect consistency regardless of what may be happening in their personal lives. For many years, Holmes embraced that responsibility without complaint. Only later did he begin asking himself whether greater balance might have been possible. His comments weren't framed as excuses, nor were they attempts to shift responsibility elsewhere. Instead, they sounded like the reflections of someone reaching a stage of life where achievements are measured differently than they were decades earlier. Early in a career, success often means promotions, awards, ratings, and professional recognition. Later in life, however, people frequently begin measuring success through relationships, health, peace of mind, and time spent with loved ones. Holmes appeared to recognize that shift. He has often spoken about gratitude despite the hardships he has faced. He remains thankful for the opportunities broadcasting provided. He appreciates the loyalty of viewers who supported him throughout his career. And perhaps most importantly, he continues expressing hope that his mobility can improve despite years of medical setbacks. That optimism has become one of the defining characteristics of this stage of his life. Doctors, physiotherapists, and rehabilitation specialists have all played important roles in helping Holmes regain strength. Progress has been gradual rather than dramatic, but he has repeatedly emphasized that giving up simply isn't an option. Every small improvement matters. Every step taken without assistance becomes another personal victory. That mindset extends beyond his health. Professionally, Holmes has continued adapting to a rapidly changing media landscape. The television industry today bears little resemblance to the one he entered decades ago. Streaming services, podcasts, digital news platforms, and social media have transformed how audiences consume content. Many broadcasters from Holmes' generation found those changes difficult. Yet he continued evolving with the industry rather than disappearing from it. His willingness to keep working despite personal challenges reflects the same resilience that characterized his early career. Still, when discussing the past, Holmes' words often return to one central theme: perspective. Only after experiencing illness, loss, and major life changes, he suggests, do many people truly recognize what mattered most all along. That doesn't mean success becomes meaningless. It simply means priorities evolve. Looking back, Holmes has indicated that if there is one lesson worth sharing, it is that professional achievement should never completely replace personal connection. Careers eventually change. Television programs end. Public attention moves elsewhere. But relationships require constant attention if they are to survive life's inevitable challenges. Whether that realization arrived too late is something only Holmes himself can answer. What is clear, however, is that his reflections have been far more measured than the sensational headlines often suggest. Instead of attacking the past, he seems focused on learning from it. And perhaps that is the most revealing statement of all that as the months passed, one thing became increasingly clear. Both Eamonn Holmes and Ruth Langsford were determined to move forward, even if they chose different paths to get there. For years, they had been viewed as a single television partnership. Now, for the first time in decades, the public was beginning to see them as two individuals rebuilding separate lives. For Holmes, that process meant accepting that some questions would never have simple answers. When journalists asked him to explain exactly why the marriage ended, he resisted reducing nearly 3 decades of shared history to a single headline. A relationship lasting almost 30 years cannot be summarized by one disagreement, one difficult year, or one life-changing event. Instead, Holmes suggested that relationships evolve over time, shaped by countless decisions, circumstances, and personal challenges that outsiders rarely witness. That perspective contrasted sharply with the speculation surrounding the divorce. Tabloids continued publishing dramatic stories, many based on anonymous sources or unverified claims. Every reported disagreement became front-page news, while ordinary moments were often presented as evidence of something much larger. Holmes rarely responded directly to those reports, understanding that public debate would likely create more noise than clarity. Instead, he focused on something he could control: his recovery. His physical condition remained one of the greatest challenges of his life. Even after multiple surgeries, mobility was still limited. Walking long distances remained difficult, and some days were significantly better than others. Holmes admitted that rehabilitation wasn't measured in weeks or months anymore. It had become a long-term commitment requiring patience, discipline, and determination. Those closest to him have often described his resilience as remarkable. Although setbacks continued, he refused to define himself by illness alone. Rather than disappearing from public life, Holmes continued broadcasting whenever his health allowed. Viewers noticed that while he occasionally relied on mobility aids, his personality remained unchanged. The familiar humor, quick observations, and conversational interviewing style that had made him popular for decades were still very much present. That consistency reassured many longtime supporters. They weren't simply watching a television presenter. They were watching someone determined not to let adversity erase the career he had spent decades building. Away from television, Holmes also appeared to be embracing a different pace of life. Years earlier, his schedule had been dominated by early alarms, studio rehearsals, production meetings, and constant deadlines. Following his health struggles and personal changes, he began speaking more openly about appreciating quieter moments. Friends, family, and simple routines gradually became just as important as professional commitments. It's a realization many people experience later in life. After years of chasing success, recognition, and achievement, priorities often shift toward health, relationships, and peace of mind. Holmes has hinted that this transition wasn't something he planned. It was something life forced him to confront. Meanwhile, Ruth Langsford's own journey continued attracting public attention. She remained active in television while also discussing the emotional process of adjusting to life after divorce. Rather than portraying herself as someone overwhelmed by change, she described discovering new confidence through independence. Her message was straightforward. Moving forward doesn't mean forgetting the past. It means accepting it. That attitude seemed to mirror Holmes' own reflections, even if each expressed them differently. Neither appeared interested in creating a public feud. Neither consistently blamed the other. Instead, both acknowledged that ending a long marriage is painful regardless of the circumstances. That maturity earned respect from many observers. In an era where celebrity separations often become prolonged public battles, Holmes and Langsford largely avoided turning deeply personal experiences into ongoing entertainment. Of course, that didn't stop public fascination. Fans continued comparing interviews, searching for hidden meanings in carefully chosen words, and wondering whether reconciliation had ever been possible. Holmes has never suggested that looking backward would change the future. If anything, his recent comments indicate the opposite. Regret, he explained, can teach valuable lessons, but it cannot rewrite history. What matters now is learning from those experiences.